Sujata, are we live? It's 5 o'clock, so should I start?
Some issue. Few seconds.
Okay, so just let me know.
We are live now.
Okay. Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Komalika Bose, coordinator of the National Scientific Committee for Shared Built Heritage, ICOMOS India, and as member of the National Scientific Committee of Historic Towns and Villages, Council of Monuments and Sites India, I welcome you to the second day of Series 3 webinar, which focuses on safeguarding intangible cultural heritage for historic precincts and areas. We represent the India chapter of ICOMOS, a unique and expansive global network working towards promoting the application of theory, methodology, and scientific techniques to the conservation of cultural heritage places, with the underlying value of uniting around heritage. Our membership is broad-based and interdisciplinary, thus providing a forum where individuals and institutions concerned with the conservation, protection, rehabilitation, and enhancement of cultural heritage sites can meet to exchange information, views, and on the principles and practices in the field. East Zone ICOMOS India and National Scientific Committee of Historic Towns and Villages, with the support of Emerging Professionals Working Group of ICOMOS India, has been hosting a series of webinars on resilient and sustainable development of historic precincts and areas with a focus on West Bengal. The idea is to establish a convergence between various stakeholders. These webinars are with the focus that though we have a vast built and cultural heritage in West Bengal, the lack of implementation and agency that both at the governance level and at the grassroots level has led to a lack of awareness and advocacy required to legislate and heritage precincts and tools around it to give agency at all levels across the board. So the first Series 1 held in August 2020 elucidated the concepts, frameworks, needs and experience of heritage precincts and areas. Series 2 in October 2020 took a close look at heritage economics and the legal, administrative and financial mechanisms that would enable economically viable and sustainable conservation of such areas. Series 3 began on 21st November to overlap with World Heritage Week where we deliberated on the community engagement and identified good practices in mobilizing community stewardship in conservation and management of heritage, both tangible and intangible. We saw varied presentations and discussions by organizations ranging from global networks such as the Aga Khan Trust and their work in the Nizamuddin Basti, as well as a range of grassroots preservation organizations that have been trying to mobilize and create awareness at the community level, at the resident level in parts of West Bengal. With that background, today, as we continue the series on series 3, the spotlight is on intangible cultural heritage that has passed down generations and has evolved in response to the natural and social environment of a place. It thereby strongly contributes to building a sense of identity, responsibility, and belonging among the communities. We acknowledge, and UNESCO has wonderfully mapped this constellation of living heritage, that intangible cultural heritage is indeed traditional, contemporary, and living. They encompass the inherited traditions as well as rural and urban contemporary cultural practices, and include oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge, and practices concerning nature and the universe, or the knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. The discussion today will thus examine what policies and programs are needed for integration of ICH, its revitalization efforts, along with its integration in conservation of historic areas that ensure cultural sustainability and long-term viability. Gaps and progress in harnessing the potential contribution of culture in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals will also be explored across global, national, regional, and local scales. Before we begin this evening's program, I would once again like to remind on the house rules, where we request the audience to switch off their audio and video. There will be question answer session at the end, and you may post your questions in the chat box to Anshika Jain, while the audience on Facebook may post it in the comments section. In both cases, kindly leave your name and affiliation. While facing any issues during the session, please raise the hand icon and our team will support you through the process. I would now like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Shikha Jain. Dr. Shikha Jain's wide experience in cultural heritage ranges from representations at UNESCO World Heritage Committee meetings to more than 50 World Heritage conservation and museum planning projects across India, largely realized through her organization, Drona. As an international expert, she has advised government organizations in Singapore, Malaysia, UAE, Myanmar, and UNESCO offices at Jakarta, Indonesia, and Myanmar on World Heritage nominations. She has worked as consultant at the UNESCO New Delhi and steered several successful inscriptions for UNESCO World Heritage sites in India and mobilized conservation projects funded by the Getty Foundation USA and the World Monuments Fund. She has authored, edited several papers and books on cultural heritage of India. We are indeed grateful to have Dr. Jain join us today as the keynote speaker. Over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kamalika, for that introduction. For some reason, my label is showing as Kamalika Boss.
I'm really sorry.
I don't mind impersonating you for this session. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the East Zone, ICOMOS India, for inviting me to this very interesting webinar series. I've been listening to the previous ones, and I think it's an excellent contribution to the thought process on policies related to urban conservation, to cities, to historic cities, and it really is very comprehensive and covers all aspects. I'm really happy today that you've invited me for a session which is linking the intangible cultural heritage to the built fabric or tangible heritage, or really looking at how the historic cities can address what I would say the living heritage, which is a recent term that is more in use now, combining both these. I'm going to start the presentation and we'll just share my screen. If you can confirm that my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes.
Okay. So as I already mentioned, the presentation primarily focuses on living heritage and how Indian cities, what kind of living heritage they have, and how projects or urban development ministry or even professionals and NGOs are dealing with this for such a long time. And, so we will be looking at what is living heritage in Indian cities. I will give some examples of the challenges. I'll quote few case studies where one has attempted to connect that living heritage with urban conservation and management and planning. And lastly, I will just conclude with, what could be a possible way to really make it happen so that we can link the living heritage with sustainable development of our cities. So starting with the definition itself, ICOMOS has recently, come up with the definition of the living heritage, and it actually talks about a living heritage approach, which is a move further from the value-based approach, and it's largely a people-centric approach that that is what ICOMOS is advising. In a way, it is a bit different from what UNESCO speaks about in living heritage, because UNESCO primarily focuses on the living heritage term under the ICH, which is the intangible cultural heritage. Kamalika has already explained in detail, the definition that you see on my screen. She just read that out. And she also spoke about the ICH, diving into the intangible cultural heritage or living heritage, which UNESCO has actually captured in this video. So it's just a 1-minute video. You can go through this before I move to the next slide. This is how they've sort of defined and mapped the living heritage.
Intangible cultural heritage takes infinite forms. It is a source of human creativity and cultural diversity. Living heritage brings human beings and communities closer together. The 2003 Convention aims at safeguarding this heritage and ensuring its continuous transmission. In 10 years, UNESCO listed almost 500 intangible cultural heritage elements. But how do we grasp the diversity of these elements? How are the cultural practices of communities across more than 100 countries connected? UNESCO mapped them all against 1,000 concepts and invites you to dive into intangible cultural heritage. How does living heritage relate to nature? And what about you? What about your heritage? Keep it lively and pass it on.
So this was a short video created by UNESCO to look at living heritage. And it sort of shows, the complexity of this, It just shows the complexity of this living heritage, which is actually 503 elements across so many countries that they have mapped. Sorry, I'm not able to, sorry, this is a technical glitch and I'm not able to get out of this. Just give me a moment. Okay, sorry about that. So this just shows, the intangible or living heritage as defined by different international organizations. And moving on now to how India is looking at living heritage. And of course, I mean, the very name India and its heritage, we are very much aware across the world that the living component is so essential to define any heritage in India. And recently, Niti Aayog has accepted in its report in June 2020 that the living heritage and this dynamism in India needs to be recognized and addressed appropriately while providing a management framework for India's heritage, because it's different from the Western nations and at times it shows more continuity. Since centuries, there is, sometimes not break in the usage of a particular site in existence. INTAC in 2004 in its charter defined it quite well, because they are talking about the heritage that is manifest in both tangible and intangible forms. And that is essentially the living heritage. And in its diversity, it defines the composite culture of the country. And they say that conserving the living heritage therefore offers the potential to conserve both traditional buildings and traditional ways of building and even traditional ways of use and lifestyle, I would say. There are organizations across India, various NGOs, and this is one example of the Maharana Mewar Charitable Foundation, which has started a World Living Heritage Festival since 2012. Because they want to promote the living heritage of Udaipur and also understand, living heritage across various cultures. And this is an initiative with UNESCO New Delhi that has been continuing since 2012. So there are these discourses on living heritage in India. And if we really see, even in 2011, when UNESCO had created the Indian Heritage Cities Network program, they came up with the definition, which was larger and looking at the living component. And this is the definition that they gave, that heritage is not only monuments or architectural masterpieces, it is about the way a settlement evolves in relationship to its natural surroundings, the water bodies. A city's heritage is about its streets and public squares, including basic utilities, food and festivals, crafts and craftspeople, and about people's livelihoods and contemporary creativity. So it covers, the vast gamut that we just saw in the previous definitions. And this was already part of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development program under NURM at that time. And if we see our country in a country where, suddenly the highways, the
Shikha, you have become muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
When was it muted?
In the previous slide.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Was it muted before this or?
No, just this one.
Talking about highways.
Yes.
Okay, so in a country where, the national highways transform into pilgrim routes, like during the time of Kavariya, processions, the urban streets and squares corporate as ritual spaces, stones on pavements may evolve into living temples, and mega-scale Kumbh Mela installations, they become accepted role models for city planning and urban management, which was established by this study by Rahul Mehrotra and the Harvard studio that was taken up. So in such scenario, the significance of living heritage in cities definitely cannot be ignored, and we have to address it with any component of urban renewal or urban development and urban conservation. And just to give you a brief, cases of how this understanding is different in different cities or what kind of components or complexities are there. This is an example of a public square in the city of Jaipur, the 18th century city. And you can see the main public square or the chopper. This is a 19th century picture where you see the informal vendors, the fulwalas and the churiwalas and other general crafts that were sold at that time. And it was in 2009 and 10 that actually this association, because they still exist as temporary kiosks, you can see out here on the left side. And in 2009-10, they came to the government and they said, why, we were here since the 19th century, make permanent structures for us. And that's when we had a dialogue with them and we said, you were there, you had these temporary kiosks and that is what is going to be, designed for you. So this one was an exercise with the vendors community, and this entire space was designed in a manner that the kiosk could be, folded and closed at night and locked, and they could actually be designed properly, which is, the case of designing for informal or intangible aspects in our cities. However, by 2014, the mayor just decided that actually they needed to be removed off from this space because the shopkeepers behind, who had permanent shops, they were concerned that these places would become permanent and that it will block their sales. So they, as an association, collected together and talked to the mayor, and all these people were just removed. In fact, the association that time asked us if they could get those kiosks because they had got a land to be relocated. But we were very convinced that these are aspects in our cities that really cannot go, and they come back. And here in 2020, I see about 2 months back, again, there is this picture of Chopper, and you have the Fulwalas here. On the right side, you can see this lady who offered a flower to me. She didn't even take money when I offered it. It was just out of feeling. But this is, one aspect that we need to realize in our cities, and something that anthropologists like Noel Egenter said a long time back, or even what Rahul Mehrotra says, that the temporary city or these temporary structures are actually more permanent than the permanent fabric of our city. And unless we understand this cultural aspect, we will not be able to address both together and really make it sustainable. And another case that I like to show usually is this one. This is in the city of Udaipur. It is on the lake bed. You can see this collection of women, and in the middle, you can see that there is a blue structure, which is actually a water tanker. And I was it was in 2006 when the lake was completely dry, and I was, working around the site, and I just checked with the local person that what's happening here. And he said, this is a usual ritual, it happens about 3-4 times a day. And then I got to know that it is when there is a death in the family, the ladies actually have to take a community bath in the lake, because that is the auspicious place for them, particular spot near the ghat. And irrespective of the fact that they have, toilets, attached toilets in their houses, which has water supply, they can go back, and actually take bath in their houses. But because this spot itself is venerated and the community ritual is so important, they actually stand on the lake bed and they order a water tanker, even though the lake is dry. So again, this raises a question that when we have to do planning in our historic city course, can we really go ahead without understanding these kind of associations and rituals, which are still embedded in the minds of our local people and citizens and the communities that live in there. So moving on from here, I'm going to just show you some examples where some attempt was made on integrating this living heritage with urban conservation and management initiatives. I will begin with the city of Udaipur, one of my favorite cities, and you see it's really, one of the most picturesque set in a valley with the Lake Pichola right there. And this was the lake that I was showing, which was completely dry in the previous photograph, and you could see the ladies on the lake bed. Just a quick, some key facts. I don't want to get into details of the history of the city. It's a 16th century city. But if you note, there was a city development plan that was made, which said that there is approximately population of 5 lakhs with a slum population of 1,19,000. And once they prepared the city development plan, they actually got into an agreement with UNESCO New Delhi and the Maharana Mewar Foundation, because they felt that the city development plan didn't address heritage, which was essential for Udaipur. And they wanted UNESCO New Delhi to look at, how it could be, and the Indian Heritage Cities program to really look at how it could be a heritage-based development. And, this was, as a team, we reviewed and put a critique and tried to have interventions to integrate the component. In case of Udaipur, you've already seen that when the lake is dried, it's really critical, both for the local citizens as well as to the city's economy, which relies on tourism. And you have the famous international hotels like Lake Palace actually doing camel rides on the lake bed when this happens, just to entertain their tourists. But it is very, very critical. Like I said, the MMCF in UNESCO New Delhi and Udaipur Municipal Corporation hosted this joint cooperation program, and where they were looking at integrating the intangible with the tangible, and also a more heritage-based approach to the planning. And this is an aspect that the Royal Foundation actually continues through the festivals that they are celebrating in the main palace square since the 16th century. Also in the conservation program, so it's not only the building itself that is conserved, like the Nakar Khana Ki Chhatri here, but also the Nagarchi, the traditional family, was interviewed, and the Nagarchi was reinstated back with the Nagara that was also conserved. So this is a conservation policy they adopted, including all rituals during construction and conservation, like this kalash that you can see being placed on the chhatri. And it's this aspect of living heritage also that is very essential within the city. And while reviewing the plan, we saw that there are several crafts villages in the city, but the crafts people don't have direct access, and they are actually migrating to other urban areas. And this was an aspect completely ignored in the city development plan. We had an anthropologist in the team, and you can see on the right side, there is a map. So she suggested that we should actually overlap the tourist spots with the crafts villages. And so we worked out, and we realized that the tourist spots are actually very close to the crafts villages. But unless you create a route through that, the tourist is not going to experience that particular living component of the city, which is very critical even for the socioeconomics, to give the direct access to the craftsperson. So this was a proposal that was given to the government, and some of the crafts walks now integrate this proposal in Udaipur. But we also found, when I was telling you, the slum population of 1,19,000, we realized that the slums were actually crafts clusters, the old crafts villages, rural villages, which became part of the urban area, which happens in most of our cities. So this was an important aspect. We, even if it is a crafts village or a rural area within an urban area, you can't really label it as a slum area. And I want to, in this case, also bring highlight this point, that the Kumartali area in Kolkata was actually, the upgradation was under a slum upgradation DPR under Jain and Europe. So it's not only in Udaipur, I found in several areas, our crafts, which is actually our living heritage, gets categorized under slum, which is a great concern, of course. But the key point here is really to integrate this into our planning document, into our tourist itineraries, and actually link it together so that the craftspeople get direct access. And today Udaipur is looking at the smart city area, It's already in the Freer Barcelona Smart City Expo. They presented the city as a smart living heritage city, probably the only city which was presenting its heritage in that particular session. The whole focus is on linking, all these activities, promoting crafts in the area, along with the built heritage component. So these various heritage walks, make you experience the Haveli's people lifestyle, including the religious associations, temples, wells, and rituals, which could be significant monument or could be ordinary spaces. But then you have that local association, which people, want to know about the local stories, encouraging promotion of local arts and crafts, and sharing the stories of the local community. And today, like I already mentioned, they have this World Living Heritage Festivals, which was started in 2012. And it was supposed to happen in 2019, the fifth one. It is now postponed to next year, but every year it is actually getting bigger and bigger, trying to get more exchange on this component of living heritage and how we can link it with our historic city upgradation. And this is, one of the guides, Chinmay, the one in green that you can see. He actually came to one of the World Living Heritage Festival in Udaipur, and he realized that he can actually start living heritage walks. And he took his own initiative, and he's now conducting these living heritage walks in the city.
Social studies homework, model paper.
The next example that I'm going to show you is on Hirday, which is the Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, was floated by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. You can see how the 12 cities were picked, definitely because of the ICH component, whether it is, the Sikh traditions in Amritsar, the Golden Temple, the church in Velankani, the Dargah in Ajmer, or the temples, the monastery in Gaya. So it's sort of tried to target all possible diverse intangible cultural heritage values in this particular urban renewal program or urban conservation program. It was one of its kind. And there was an attempt to address the living heritage, though it's not really the mandate of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, but that's the first time there was an effort, and it was all the 12 cities had quite a bit of success in achieving some very good ground level interventions. And for Ajmer and Pushkar, where we were involved, the whole focus was in all these cities. The first thing was to map the heritage assets, and it was not only the tangible but also the intangible heritage assets, and then to propose 5 major interventions as 5 pilot projects that could be taken across. And some of these included like heritage walks, again, upgrading the areas, but also talking to the people, the locals, and making some kinds of intervention. Because this is a government time-bound project, so there are always gaps in the stakeholder consultations or in mapping rituals. If you're really mapping rituals, you need the entire year, because our rituals have a cycle. So usually government projects don't allow for that kind of social mapping. And that's why we had a parallel research networking project with the Cardiff University and the School of Planning and Architecture, where we looked at the social and the ICH component and interviewed the owners in the walk area, and really tried to determine, how the living heritage traditions in the city are continuing. And this is an example of a small Haveli called we call it the Gota Haveli, because this old Haveli, which had beautiful paintings of Ajmer city, started manufacturing Gota about a few years back. So you can see the loom here that is actually hiding the paintings. And the owner was completely oblivious of the fact that these paintings are of any significance. It's only during the awareness and talking during the walk time, we try to help him understand that if there is a heritage walk, where people can actually come and see how the Gota is being made, with the loom, but also the loom is kept in a manner that, you know, there is distance, there is respect, and the paintings are conserved. So you also have the story of Ajmer in the paintings inside the Haveli, and that can give a great experience to the visitors on this, on both the Gota making as well as, you know, the history of the place. So these are the small kind of interventions that one was trying to do under Hirde. And lastly, I will talk about Jaipur. I'm taking these three cases as, you know, Udaipur, which was a local government initiative, Ajmer, which came through the central government program, you know, trying to show how these various projects look at living heritage. And in the case of Jaipur, you know, which is probably one of the only cities in India which has both the UNESCO Creative City tag as well as the UNESCO World Heritage City tag. And there was a conscious decision that, you know, we need to first move for the creative city recognition, because crafts and folk art and the living heritage is really very critical both to the planning and to the functioning and operations of Jaipur, and for retaining, for its long-term sustainability. And that's why this designation was in 2015, and World Heritage City was actually in 2019, which was the second step. And of course, on its built heritage, and Jaipur had focused, you know, since 2006, conscious conservation projects had been taken up. You can see this kind of a table, but you know, this very initiative to go for the UNESCO Creative City as the first designation, and also to ensure that criteria 6 or intangible is included in the World Heritage, is something that we felt would help the living heritage component, the crafts people, and really look at the holistic heritage management of the city and not just the built fabric itself. And these were some few examples where, you know, it has taken up conservation of entire areas, but even in the built heritage conservation, one of the main focus is really promoting the craftsmanship. And that's why you see the kind of built heritage projects that have been taken up by Jaipur and also in Rajasthan have really created a very improved socio-economic environment for the traditional masons and the skilled workers, and in the sense that you actually see them now going across India and you know, and being involved in projects across various states which have recently been taking up conservation projects. So this is one example where again the community was involved, and it was not just the built heritage conservation, but also talking to them and starting a walk. And similar walks like which were, you know, there for this Terracotta Rasta, which is for the brass crafts men in Jaipur in a particular street, the Maniharo Rasta, which is for the lakh bangle makers. Detailed social surveys and participatory walk designs were encouraged, including institutions like Oxford Brookes University, and showing the designs to people and really working with them on, you know, how it can be sustained. So even though Jaipur has the main bazaars that, you know, the government conserves, but because of this creative city designation and what UNESCO commitment for creative cities is that the sustainable development goals should be linked with your planning of the city, and whatever the deliverables you have, you know, your 3 target projects in next 3 years and 3 long-term ones need to be linked with those sustainable developments. So we had to look at improving, upgrading the craft streets and the way the craftspeople lived, besides, of course, creating more opportunities for them. And this was mapping of the craft clusters. You can see the various categorization, not only of the crafts, but also folk arts, local folk arts like Galibazi, which is just done in a mohalla in one corner, which could be a dying performing art, you know, and tamasha and puppet shows. and it's being included in this particular network. It was a commitment to implementing sustainable development projects for upgrading the crafts area. So already the Thatero Rasta and Maniharo Rasta has been taken up, and now the next few crafts areas are being taken up under this commitment. Buildings like the Rajasthan School of Arts is converted into a museum, which is actually Museum of Crafts, which is actually used for crafts workshops by the master crafts people, and students and young artisans come and learn from them. And it's whatever walk is there, it's makes sure that, you know, it goes through the shops or workshops of the craftspeople, where they can directly access the craftsperson and buy whatever products from them. And also how they can innovate in terms of design. So there are various events organized as part of this. You can see with the Iojan College of Architecture students, and this is a public installation which was done for a discussion on this Kriti Manch, or the crafts, the 36 Karkhanas or 36 crafts industries of Jaipur. And as World Heritage, like I said, the criteria 6, which says that directly associated with long-standing arts and crafts traditions that characterize the city as a center of artistic excellence throughout its history. So the whole intention here is, you know, the government or Jaipur Municipal Corporation is now committed to reporting on both these. And this is the monitoring report for Creative City that was submitted in 2019. But as a result of this, there is, you know, a definite effort, because there are some short-term and long-term targets on addressing ICH and the crafts component in association with the built heritage conservation and overall heritage management of the city, whether it is through the Creative City or through the World Heritage. So what I'm trying to explain is that these are basically the tools that one can use in some way to generate some kind of framework for living heritage, even if we do not have it in our current system or in our current governance. And so these are various activities like the 36 Karkhanas or the 36 industries. And this since last year, even this walk has a digital heritage walk experience, which is something now post-COVID, one realizes that, you know, all these markets which were closed, which actually impacted the economy, and Jaipur was actually one of the epicenters for COVID. They managed it quite well, but definitely the craftspeople suffered, and definitely a more, an experience of online sales, having a digital bazaar is what could be the key for such kind of pandemic situation or any other situation in future. So one is looking at incorporating that as part of the overall management plan for Jaipur. And lastly, I would like to conclude with, some of the key points that come through all this experience of living heritage, dealing with, historic cities across India. We can say that history, traditions, cultures are central to residents' health and identity, and planning decisions often need to reflect local values as a cultural matter and not as a technical point. So this is very important. And master planning should integrate local living heritage values and SDGs, which is important. Of course, we know in our sustainable development goals, we have, the goal 11 under 11.4 incorporates the natural and cultural heritage. But culture is something really cross-cutting, and whichever goal you take, in some ways one needs to address, as we saw that, even if it is the case of just water supply, if one doesn't understand that association with the lake and the place, as we saw in the Udaipur picture, we are not really going to achieve much. And that's why this point that planning decisions are a cultural matter really needs to be thought more in detail and need to be integrated into our planning systems. Another point that I want to say is the heritage legislation, which really needs to be based on the local values and intangible cultural heritage. This is something that, you know, I never before really experienced, but until I was working on the Kanchenjunga National Park, which was a mixed nomination, India's first mixed nomination as World Heritage Site. But this was a case where it was only a natural heritage site, and the local community came to the Ministry of Culture. They said, no, we are associated, you know, this is Mount Zonga, our god, and you cannot put it as a natural heritage. This is also cultural. And that's when the Ministry of Culture wrote back to Sikkim government, and it was prepared as a mixed nomination. But what was really, what for me was a learning in this was that all the mountain peaks and the lakes that were revered by the local Lepchas and Duttas is what got translated into the legislation for Sikkim. So if you see the Sikkim laws for, you know, for the forest areas and all, they are all about protecting the lakes and the mountains that the locals associate with. And we sometimes don't do that. We do our, you know, different kind of valuation, or it could be national protected monuments, but they create that distance with the community. And in this case, I mean, this is something that even ICOMOS really appreciated, because it was the indigenous practices that converted into a legislation. So there was no question of that legislation being flouted. In fact, it was the other way. If there is a hydropower, you know, proposed in the area, then the community actually gets together and protests against it if they feel that it's going to harm the natural resources. So this is one.
Sorry to interject. We're kind of we've wrapped up with the time, so if you could just start closing.
Fine. So this is, I just have two more points. The second last is reviewing our intangible cultural heritage or rituals to really look at whether they are still meaningful as they were, you know, within the framework of the natural or the built heritage. So this is looking from the other side and asking whether our rituals are meaningful and making them again, you know, linking them with the whatever meaning they had in terms of nature and culture. And lastly, of course, I've talked enough about the value of crafts and arts as socioeconomic. So that remains an essential component. Thank you so much. And sorry for taking a bit of extra.
Thank you, Shikha. I think we are very thankful to you that in that limited time, you have been able to cover a very vast overview, not only of sort of the key concepts and understanding of living heritage, but also how it is interpreted, understood, or even misinterpreted in the Indian context. And you have been able to demonstrate some key examples and initiatives, which have both the positives and the sort of recommendations or the negatives, like misinterpreting it into slum development. So both sides of the coin you have been able to, within this short time, showcase to us. So thank you so much. We will now move on to two presentations of case studies, which are more now, we're trying to localize some of these issues and look within the West Bengal context as to how some of these issues of intangible cultural heritage within historic areas and precincts have been have played out in various parts. So for that, I invite our first case study presenter, Shimona Chakraborty. Shimona's work explores the role of art in society, testing its potential in building relationships and create visions for the future. She is the founder of Hamdasti, a Kolkata-based artists collective that has been working on Chitpur Local, a community-based art project in the historic Bottala area of Chitpur Road. Her work is participatory in nature, engaging diverse communities over a long period of time and collaboratively intervening in public spaces. Shimona is a graduate of the Srishti School of Art and Design and Technology in Bangalore with a master's degree from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. She has been a fellow in the Art Think South Asia program at Khoj and at the Global Cultural Leadership Program hosted by the European Union. She is currently the Deputy Director of the Ghore Museum exhibition of Bengal art in Kolkata. Thank you, Shimona, for accepting our invitation today.
Thank you so much, Komalika, and thank you to ICOMOS Eastern India for this invitation. I'll just share my screen. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Komalika introduced, my name is Shimona, and I'm here talking about the work that we do at Hamdasti, a community-based arts organization in Kolkata, working in the Chitpur area. I'm going to start this presentation today with a kind of overview of the Chitpur art trail that we did in 2019. And that will also be an introduction to the Chitpur area through the images that you see. And after that, I hope to go back in time to the beginning of this initiative in 2014 and to look at some of the processes behind this culmination point, which was the art trail, and to see perhaps what the intention of the artists involved was, what the visions that they had of what kind of affect or impact they wanted to create, and how sometimes that differs from the visions for impact and change that urban planners, conservationists, policymakers might have, but also where the overlaps are. And then I hope to make a case about why and how artists can be at the table when we're discussing intangible cultural heritage and heritage precincts in our cities. So taking you to 2019 February, this was the last major initiative that we did, and there was another one planned for this year, but due to circumstances, we had to postpone it. But yes, the last major initiative was in February 2019. It was a Chitpur art trail. I'll take you on a kind of journey through this trail. So you could be a visitor who's heard about this on social media or in the news, and you land up in front of the Choitano Library, and next to that is the Minerva Theatre, both heritage buildings and cultural sites. And you are you're welcome with a map. You can even download a geolocated guide on your phone, and you start walking from one stop to the other over almost 18 stops across 1 kilometer through this Chitpur neighborhood, which is a historic precinct. You could also be a local who has sort of heard about this trail and the events happening over the weekend over the loudspeaker that we sent around the neighborhood on the auto, inviting people to come and take part. So you can be a very mixed kind of audience experiencing this neighborhood. It could be a familiar space, a neighborhood to you, and could be an unfamiliar one. But for both, we hope that the experience is unfamiliar and somewhat strange and somewhat surprising as well. So you start with the Choitano Library. You can see a sign outside that tells you that this is one of the stops. You enter the library and you're greeted by this installation on Urdu poetry. It fits within the library context, but also it connects to Nakhoda Masjid, which is another area further south on Chitpur Road. At each site, there's something for you to take away. So these are two children from the neighborhood who are experimenting with stamps and calligraphy and taking away postcards for people they love. Right next to the Choitano Library, there's a lane that goes in, and you meet a family and a group of community activists and organizers from the Tirti Bazaar area. And you wonder what they're doing here and what they have to do with Chitpur. But of course, Chitpur is a very long road, and people on one end of the road perhaps do not feel a kind of neighborly connection with people on the other end, but it's a very diverse road. So a part of it is also to connect these dots and to connect these narratives and to pose unexpected narratives and defy people's ideas of what Chitpur is and who belongs to it and who doesn't. You move to the lane, a narrow lane called Goranhata Lane opposite the Choitano Library, and you are welcomed by this installation made by a few artists. You try to figure out what they're doing. Perhaps you make a connection. You hear the comments that people in the neighborhood are making about it and engage in a discussion. You stop at the next stop, which is a jewelry store called Sudarshan Chatra. And there you're welcomed inside, and you can actually then see a kind of piece of jewelry being made and take away this little piece of inexpensive metal with you and spend some time there perhaps and not move on and keep chatting with the shopkeepers and the craftspeople. After you emerge from the very busy Goranhata Lane, you see this neighborhood which is full of bookstores and book binding shops, printing shops, which now you've arrived at the kind of the main hub of Chitpur Road, and there's Diamond Library. And outside there's another installation on a mirror, which reflects a line from some of the Jatra scripts that this library publishes and sells. And you can also go inside and meet the owners, and they've set up a display and a kind of exhibition of their archival material for you, and you can spend some time talking to them. Or you can carry on and you see this installation of old stamps and zinc plates that have been set up. And just behind in this very nondescript store, which otherwise you sort of realize is for making ordinary signage, you realize that this gentleman, Boidonath Sheel, has this collection of very old stamps, and you can talk to him about it. Or you could continue and make your own and use the new versions of the stamps to make your own bookmark and carry on. There's a stop number 15 is at the Makhonlal Das and Sons Mishti shop, where there's a special shondesh that has been made for you with a shondesh mold, which is specifically for this trail. And a lot of people got lost because they're through the lanes and bylanes of the bazaar, and that's also fine. And I think that's that sense of also unexpected encounters, or not being used to parts of the city, or experiencing parts of the city that you're not used to, that are outside your comfort zone, are also important. And you might see this in this photo of a series of photographs which have been installed in the utensil stores which are along the way. And some of the last stops are the Shondesh mold shops, where wooden blocks are made for creating and decorating sweetmeats. And there, one of the Shondesh mold makers has made his own, has used his skill to make a kind of image of Chitpur and how he sees it. That's Bhima Dash. And opposite, you can also sit and observe a demo or try your hand at it. It's also quite difficult to try your hand at it and spend some time learning the techniques of making a wooden block. And the final stop was by Star Harmonium and Mr. Shaha, who has brought some of the older harmoniums and tablas that he had in his family that have been passed down through the ages, the picture of his grandfather, and set up a display at the end of the trail. Along the way, of course, there are many buildings that you can see, but they are a part of this living heritage, as Dr. Jain just spoke about before, and they form a kind of backdrop or a part of the narrative as well. And that's where your trail ends. So this was 2019, and this trail was really a culmination of 4 years of work in the neighborhood by a group of artists. Over time, we had grown to a collective of 10 artists who had then built relationships and an ecosystem of 100 community collaborators. But the main thing was that this was done through many small projects in small engagements, workshops, public installations, games, walks in the neighborhood, for people in the neighborhood and with people in the neighborhood. These had a kind of public facing side when they took the form of 2 festivals in the span of those 4 years, and also in the form of exhibitions and labs at galleries and spaces in the city, where people from this neighborhood and the artists had a chance to share their work and get feedback and think about what more they could do. So these are the building blocks of this process at Chitpur and at this neighborhood. And as you can see, it's a neighborhood which has, many different kinds of urban trades, which are actually crafts, but they're looked at as urban trades. It has a lot of interesting built heritage and a lot of also local stories and narratives, which you find at every corner. But I guess it begs the question that why are artists really, or what is the importance and why artists want to engage with intangible cultural heritage or these narratives of communities, and what they're really trying to do out of this. Do we have a master plan of a kind of heritage precinct, or a plan for how we want to see this neighborhood? I think artists perhaps approach this from a slightly different perspective as to why they want to engage with intangible cultural heritage. So I'll talk about some of these smaller projects and steps that led up to this craft trail and led up to this culmination of 4 years of work at Chitpur. So going all the way back to 2014, this is really where we started with the students of the Oriental Seminary School. And there are 2 projects that you can see here. One is the pop-up museum and the other one is the memory game. And in both cases, the students of the Oriental Seminary School actually went around the neighborhood, talking to people and mapping things that they found interesting, stories that they found relevant, that they found surprising, that they thought were old and merited attention. And they created this pop-up museum and this game for people to come and interact and engage with that, with those narratives from their perspective. So what why are we then, so fishing out these underrepresented stories? Why are we trying to get young people to look for stories that have been left out or narratives that have been forgotten? I think it's because through this process, there's a sense of building identity, of creating recognition for yourself as a young person in your community, as a young leader in your community, something that I think a lot of young people don't have a chance to experience. So it's really your civic role in your neighborhood and how you are playing a role in guiding people through these streets and through these lanes and by lanes and telling the stories from your perspective. And that became really important to us. And I think that, therefore, if we start looking at it in terms of affect or impact, we're looking at really bringing out not just stories which are old, but stories that are underrepresented, stories that are in the margins. We also worked in the next iteration with the girls from the Sri Vidya Niketan students. This was a project by Ruchira Das. And here, other than underrepresented stories, we realized one very important reason to engage with ICH is to create unfamiliar experiences. I think how we walk the city, we all fall into our own patterns of our own communities, our own experiences and expectations, and our own bubbles. So how can engaging with intangible cultural heritage help you to break out of that bubble, to experience parts of the city that you may not have encountered before? It even may be your own backyard, like in the case of these young girls who hadn't really gone around talking to shopkeepers, talking to craftspeople, exploring buildings, or even the theater next door. So it becomes a way of making women, young people, and us and everyday ordinary citizens navigate their own city in a completely new way. And by doing so, hopefully breaking some boundaries as to in terms of how we navigate our cities and how we experience our cities. And what is really the map of the city or the imagination of the city in our mind. Till this point, I think all these small interventions somehow magically and incrementally led to people really recognizing Chitpur, or it being a part of people's map of their own city, which otherwise may have been limited to South Calcutta. And for people in this neighborhood also reoriented their own maps of their own neighborhood. So that's really important. And also what it did was, for a school like Oriental Seminary School, which happens to be a very historic school, they ended up creating their own archive. So here you can see the students have made an exhibition about the neighborhood, and that became a larger initiative where the teachers set up their own archive of the school. They dug into the libraries and they brought out all the artifacts and set up a room just for their archive. They also set up a heritage club with Intac, and Intac's coming in and creating that bridge was really important to continue the initiative. So it became a way for people again to recognize their own neighborhoods and their own stories as well. Another focus is creating unusual encounters. So you have underrepresented stories, unfamiliar experiences, and unusual encounters, where we're really looking at building new relationships. And intangible cultural heritage, or these stories, narratives, become a way of doing that. So here we collaborated with the police in the neighborhood and created a game at the police station, which was moderated and facilitated by the police and included their stories and their photographs and their material that they had collected as they were policing the neighborhood. And doing this and creating something which you never do at a police station, and meeting the police in this context of a game in a playful environment is a way of creating these unusual encounters with people in your own city. And that, I think, in terms of how it shapes the impact of the affect, is to create an ecosystem of different participants and stakeholders. So by the end of these projects, we had the Chitpur Craft Collective, which was a group of the craftspeople and different artists who had worked on these projects and wanted to work on it, as well as other designers, architects, etc. And also we had a network of people who wanted to continue to support artists and artist projects in the Chitpur neighborhood, and the Kolkata police was one of them, one of those stakeholders that emerged from this process of creating unusual encounters. And finally, when we're engaging with the past, why do we really engage with the past? And I think what the artists are able to bring to the table in this regard is to re-examine the past. The past can often be uncomfortable. Our own, our heritage can be uncomfortable. It can be, it brings up many questions. So this was a project by Shrota Dutta, who brought together the old photo studios in the neighborhood. So there are photo studios in the neighborhood that are over 100 years old, and women who have visited these photo studios to shoot their matrimonial photographs or their photographs before their wedding, when they were, sort of in the marriage market. And Shraddha also created a series of discussions between the photographers and the women on this tradition of creating matrimonial photographs, and what is an ideal, what are the ideals of beauty, what are the ideals of womanhood and being a wife, being a mother, a woman's role in society. And so I think when we're engaging with ICH, when we're engaging with our heritage, artists can play a really important role in questioning it as well, and using the past to create critical discussions about the present. And that discussion carried on inside the photo studios, on the streets, through this bioscope, where different kinds of audiences came together to listen to the stories that had been shared by the women and the photographers. And in this way, we see how over time, very incrementally, iteratively, artists and the members of the community started collaborating and working together to engage with the past, engage with past narratives, but in a way where we're really looking at stirring the pot, at creating discussion, at creating dialogue, at creating new relationships. And as a result, a part of the past gets preserved and gets shared and showcased and recirculated, and a part of it perhaps is questioned and put aside, and we move on in that way. So I think that's where artists can really be at the table. And when we think of artists, we're not really thinking, I mean, one way of thinking about it is, of course, beautifying the neighborhood, of thinking about other goals like urban renewal. But I think what can be really powerful is we can use the arts to also engage with the past in a more robust and participatory manner. So what happens then really when we do something like this? So if I look at the case of artists working in a neighborhood with a particular community over such a long period of time, what can we expect and what perhaps we can't expect from artists, and what do we need to create a larger ecosystem for? So I'll just talk about that through the example of Diamond Library. Diamond Library, after the Oriental Seminary School, was our second collaborator. And so they've been working with us from the very beginning. It's run by two elderly gentlemen, the Shield brothers, and this has been a family business for 3 generations. They sell Jatra scripts of, this kind of non-proscenium theater scripts that they sell, and they have incredible cover art and illustrations for all these scripts, and this beautiful shop as well, which has its own charm and ambience. And the Diamond Library brothers, they from the very beginning had created an installation which they would, at every iteration of the festival, set it up, and they would showcase all the materials that they had in their archive. And over time, different artists like Suhasini, who has made this mirror using some of the titles from their books, has worked with the material at the Diamond Library. And we continue to do so. So the image that you see on your left is an artist, Nilanjan Das, who's using another title that says Kotha Dao Abar Ashbe, to look at gender norms in public spaces and interaction between couples in public spaces, and what is allowed and what is not allowed. So artists continue to engage with the Diamond Library, its narratives, its content, its imagery, its texts and typography in different ways. But what about, I'm sure you'll be wondering, what about new products that you can make? What about making sure that once the brothers are no longer able to manage the store, what happens to all that material? What happens to the street? And how do people remember this space? And for that, I think it's been our initiative, and we've tried to create a large ecosystem of people through the Chitpur Craft Collective, but we haven't gotten there yet. And I think that's where we feel like you need to build this ecosystem of architects, policymakers, planners to come together with artists at the table as well. But it's not necessary that our roles are always overlapping, or they're always the very same. But I just hope that through this small case that and this experience that we've had at Chitpur, we can think about the role that arts can play in engaging with intangible cultural heritage, and how that can be a really interesting and powerful tool for engaging communities, for questioning our present, for re-looking at the past, and reimagining the way that we engage with the city. And another thing I think that artists can also do is really imagine, if you can see in everything that we do, and even in this picture of the Diamond Library, we've not tried to create something which is spectacular, something that really changes the urban landscape, but enhance it or draw attention to it, or change the way you engage with it. So that's all, I think, something that also we can perhaps we can continue to build on and learn from as we move forward, not just in Chitpur, but in all other projects where architects, conservationists, urban planners, policymakers are engaging artists on the ground and communities on the ground in urban historic precincts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shimona. I would request you to stop sharing your screen, and your presentation has really brought to the fore that not only do artists as their own try to re-examine and interrogate the past and engage with it, but also sort of reinstill a sense of identity in the resident community, and then begins to become a sort of tool for civic engagement for the wider city as well. So thank you for that. We will now move to our next case study speaker today, which is Ananya Bhattacharya. Ananya Bhattacharya is a social entrepreneur and specializes in gender, culture, and sustainable development. She started her career in information technology after graduating as an electrical engineer from Jaipur University. She is a Commonwealth Scholar with Masters in Sustainable Development from Staffordshire University, UK. Ananya is the co-founder and director of Banganatok.com, headquartered at Kolkata and working across India for inclusive and sustainable development using culture-based approaches since 2000. Ananya has worked extensively with diverse communities in India for development of community-led creative enterprise and empowering grassroots entrepreneurs with skills to bridge gender, social, and digital divides, and also negotiate their creative, to bridge gender, social, and creative divides, and also negotiate their creative and intellectual rights. Ananya is involved in global advocacy for greater recognition and investment in culture for development. Thank you for agreeing to be our case study presenter today.
Thank you, Kamalika, for that introduction. Let me share my screen. Yeah. Is it visible?
Yes.
A very good evening and maybe good morning and good afternoon to people who have joined us, and thank you for joining from various parts of the world. Today I'm going to talk about a district in West Bengal which is known as Purulia, and how investing in ICH and investing in intangible cultural heritage specifically and heritage in general has led to the transformation of this district. It is not that, it is the process is over. It is very much still underway, but we have the positive signs, and I'm going to share our experience. So Purulia is one of the districts in West Bengal, which is part of the Central Indian Choto Nagpur Plateau. So the region is very beautiful with hillocks and forests, and there are lots of communities with diverse ethnicities living in that area. But unfortunately, though it is so enormously rich in natural heritage, in built heritage, and in intangible cultural heritage, as Shimona was mentioning, those were never spoken of. Because Purulia, if you do a Google, you'll find Purulia being spoken about as the poorest district in West Bengal. So poverty was a huge challenge here. And not only that, it was suffering from insurgency and a lot of conflicts. If you look at the data, you will find that literacy rate is very poor, with only the last census, it showed only 56% illiterate and women only less than 40% illiterate. So that is the situation of the district. So no one ever spoke of Purulia and its wonders. But I'd like to explain how that transformation is happening. Now, since it is less heard of and less spoken of, let me talk a little bit about the historical sites of Purulia. Purulia has archaeological remains bearing Jain legacy. So there you see these small, here, these are the Jain Tirthankars, their statues. And this is the Rek Deul. These were made in the 9th and 11th century, and they were mostly unknown till a few years back. And in Purulia, there are places like Chara, Banda, Deulkhata, Para, where these Rek Deuls are beautiful examples of our terracotta temples. There is a terracotta temple at Cheliama, which has wonderful terracotta work and intricate design talking of stories of mythology. There is a temple at Telkupi, which is a lone survivor of 22 temples. Telkupi in 4th century BC, it used to be a port town, and it is even mentioned in Kautilya's Arthashastra. Now, when the dam was built in this area, all the temples went underwater, and now there is only one lone survivor. And this beautiful living room you are seeing, that's part of the Kashipur Rajbari. Purulia is a land of kings, and this is the present photograph of the Kashipur Rajbari. So there are palaces, there are temples, but people hardly spoke about them. Purulia has several tribes of very important anthropological significance. You know, there are tribes like Beer Horse, Shabbers, who live in the forest fringes. And maybe even 10 years back, they led a very primitive life. There are Santals, there are Mundas, and people speak several languages there. There's Kurmali, Orang, Ho. So, you know, this area is rich in languages, and now we are in the indigenous, we're entering the decade of indigenous people's languages. And this is one district where people speak a lot of indigenous languages, which is so interesting. Many of them do not have a script. And these languages do not have also future tense in some of these languages. So they are very interesting. So naturally, these communities, they have their own festivals, their own rituals, their own totems. So Purulia is a land of festivals, which are very unique and very beautiful. Tushu, Bhadu, then Karam Parab, then Choit Parab. There's a Chhata Parab, meaning umbrella dance. And, you know, umbrella festival. And that time, you know, that community which celebrates, that is, you know, their celebration where they go and they choose their partner. And when they choose a partner, they come together under the umbrella. That's the Chhata Parab. So there are these unique festivals and rituals in this area. Naturally, they're extremely rich in art and craft. You're seeing this is a storytelling tradition, and the community which lives in a village called Majramura, even till date, their only livelihood is, you know, painting, going around, singing and earning from these paintings. And they make this color with stones they collect from the hillocks. Because of the dances, you see, this is the Natua dance, which is the precursor of the Chow Dance. It's a very old traditional tribal dance. The Chow Dance is inscribed in the UNESCO representative list of heritage of humanity. So Chow Dance is there in Saraikela, Mayurbhanj and Purulia. And in Purulia, they wear an ornate mask. So in Charida is a village where the mask makers live. There is this nomadic community called Mal. And, you know, they make the Dokra metals by the lost wax metal method. The forest fringe communities, they make a lot of natural fiber basketry. So these art and craft, there are like enormous variations and varieties of art and craft. But unfortunately, you know, just as the heritage is never spoken of, the built heritage examples, these artists hardly made any income from their art when this century started, let's say 15 years back. And they were not connected to market. And Purulia is a dry area. So they had agriculture only for 2 months in a year. And the rest of the months, there were no work. So people had to migrate for work, or they did biri binding, that is tying tobacco leaves together, which is very unhealthy. So there's a lot of tuberculosis in the area. So that was the situation of this district. Now, in 2006, the Eastern Zonal Cultural Center first started working with Chow Dance and Chumur Songs and Dance, which are the lifestyle songs and dance of Purulia. And they started the revival. The project was called Revival of Performing Art Traditions for Sustainable Livelihood. And as in the Purulia, these ethnic communities, in their language, they say, Senge Jujung Kajigodurum, which means when we walk, we dance, when we talk, we sing. That is their life. So there were thousands of dancers and singers, because singing and dancing is so integral to their lifestyle. But unfortunately, they had lost the opportunity to practice, they had lost the opportunity to learn, and there was no income, and many were out migrating. In that scenario, when we started working at Bangla Natak, we call our model Art for Life. So what we do in Art for Life is we bring together the village, the artist, and the art. So we not only document the art or not only conduct skill transmission sessions with the artist, we foster direct market linkage for the artists, but we also work at the village and the community level to rebrand the villages as cultural destinations. And Purulia was our biggest challenge, where we had nearly 1,200 Chow dancers and Chumur dancers and singers with whom we started our journey in 2005. And we tried to link culture and development. So these are the various activities we did. Of course, we had to do the mapping and the inventorying, the documentation. We did a lot of heritage education and awareness. The skill transmission workshops were held under the gurus. Festivals were organized to give opportunities to the artists to perform. And village festivals were held in the villages of the artists. So to give you an idea how the process works, what I'd like to highlight is it is of critical importance that all these processes are bottom up and not top down. So, we can't go and teach a Chow dancer how to do dance, right? So they need to come and give leadership. So whenever we are embarking on this journey of revival of ICH, it's very critical to identify the gurus and to gain their attention and to make them lead the process. So we call this a knowledge attitude practice study, where we try to identify who are these leaders who can lead this whole process. So these are photos from various skill development programs across the different dance traditions. Now, over the years, I started with the story in 2005-06, but later, the Art for Life was supported. The model was supported for crafts by Government of West Bengal, and we started with the mask makers at Charida. And then seeing the impact, the government expanded it to performing traditions. And so we covered the Chow dancers and Chumur, more Chow dancers and Chumur and Natua and other dance traditions. Also, the forest fringe communities who, made ropes with the grass which grows there called the babui grass or sabai grass. We worked with them to diversify and train them in making more market-worthy, more valuable products. So right now the interventions cover, you can say, around 7,000 people. And of course the painting tradition, the folk painting tradition. Many of you know about banglanatak.com's work at Noya, which started in 2005. But our work in Majramura, that started in 2015. And this one, so these are the examples of the skill development programs. So I'll give you examples from Chow dance. Chow is a very interesting dance. And the artists, they emulate the movement of the birds, of the peacock, of the snake, of the monkey. But when we started working, we found that because of the lack of practice, because of lack of opportunity to learn, it has become just the somersaults, just the jumps. And no one knew about those old steps and the old nuances of dance. So we engage here in the photo here. You are seeing Binadhar Kumar, who is known as the Amitabh Bachchan of Chow. So we engage these veteran dancers who worked, and here you are seeing, how the young people are learning. At that time, Chow was classified as, a rural dance, and Jhumur as, something which, it's not for gentlemen. It's not even fit to watch. That was the kind of branding they had. So through these workshops, through these programs, they learned, and that added to the quality, the apple, and through a series of the heritage education programs, people became aware. And today, Purulia Chow is very famous with the artists traveling across the world. In Purulia, in the Sidhu Kano University, they have started a course on Chow, which is, I think, the best thing to happen for any art, to be included in official curriculum at the university level. So these are some of the milestones which have been achieved, which were never thought of 15 years back. So investment in skill, investment in these training programs has been a very critical step, along with, of course, documentation. Now, documentation is not only for the sake of documentation, but that provides, a resource for the community to learn. So the Chow Dance of Purulia visual article, this CD was distributed among the people because this spoke of the history of the dance and all the nuances. And for young people to appreciate, graphic novels were done in Bengali and in English. And these also became very popular. And the Jhumur songs were recorded, and these were also shared with the artists so that the artists could also use them for their promotion. Now, I'll be sharing some of the key strategies which worked. And one very important strategy is what we call today worldwide, the eco-museum movement. So in Purulia, what the government did is the government invested in developing resource centers or folk-art centers, which are the living museums. So this one is the center at the mask makers village in Charida, where anyone who goes can see the masks, can understand the process. The masks are made by paper mache. These are the centers of Chow Dance. And in each of these centers, they have annual village festivals. And Purulia, now with increasing tourism, each of these centers have become part of the itineraries. So they kind of symbolize, they kind of identify the community's culture and have become like icons. I'll just talk a little bit of Sabai. You might have seen in Okai all these products. Now, 3 years back, these women, they didn't earn anything practically. I mean, poverty in Purulia is terrible, and you can only believe only if you see. But what happened when they learned these, to make these products which are market worthy? It created a transformation. And these women who had never even seen a train because they had not ventured out of their village, they had all lived in forested areas. They traveled to Kolkata, to Goa, to Delhi, to Mumbai, and to sell their products. So, that also led to the women empowerment part. And naturally, with all these things, the younger generation, they're now taking interest in school, in education. And we hope that, the statistics which are so poor right now on education, literacy, income will be much better in very soon. I was talking of the traditional festivals, but those were not known at all. But today, the government actively supports all the festivals, giving it a lot of mileage, lot of publicity, and they have become destinations. But how it all started in 2005-06 in one of these sites called Deul Ghata, where there's a wrecked temple, a community local group, they started the initiative of Holi there. And that became very popular as folk Holi because the communities there in Holi, that is the Indian festival of color, throughout the night they dance and sing. So building on that, this Holi festival was started. And today in Holi in Purulia, there are at least 10 groups who select different spots, maybe built heritage, maybe natural heritage, dotted across the district. And they run special camps when people go and they stay in the tents and they enjoy the folk holi. So this is one example of how you create a new context for a festival for the revival of local ICH. So festivals of Purulia are now very popular. And I must mention that during Holi, this whole area is full of red blooms of palash flower. So, the flames of forest. So it's an extremely beautiful experience of red flowers and the colors of Holi. Since last 2-3 years, we have been working here as part of a research project we are doing, to identify heritage-sensitive IP and marketing strategies. So what we were thinking is that, okay, the community has come forward a lot, but what else can be done? So we realized that though Chow Dance is inscribed in the UNESCO representative list of heritage of humanity, though the Chow mask in 2018, it got the geographical indication. However, these are not used in branding. This is, in fact, a general challenge we have in our country. We know that our ICH, our cultural heritage, is representative of our community, our culture, but we don't consider it in the branding, in our image building. So we started actively working on that. So this logo, which many of you are familiar with, is a geographical indication logo. And this Chow Mask of Purulia logo is the logo for the GI accreditation, which is by the collective of the mask makers at Chanida. So now, in their tags, they're using these logos. And, when we promote this, it also gives the international, the national visitors an idea like where to go to see the culture. So we are actively integrating these in the positive promotion. Now, when I buy a mask, I don't get the story of the mask, right, of the dance. So now what they have done is they've recorded the performances, and there is a website, puruliachow.com, where all a minute, but all these recordings are present. And using a QR code, you can actually see the dance. So these are some of the examples of how technology is taking this forward further. One way to cultural tourism is, of course, visiting, but there is much more to it. And that is, the cultural collaboration and exchange. And here you see an indigenous group, Bangara, from Australia, who came to Purulia, and they did a co-production with the Chow dancers. Now, this girl you see here, Moshavi, I must tell you her story too. Moshavi was the daughter of a Chow dancer, Jagannath. And she wanted to dance. And when she wanted to dance, there was a strict no-no, because girls don't dance. Chow is an acrobatic male dance. But Moshavi refused. And Moshavi and her sister, they were one of the first female Chow dancers. And now there are two groups of women Chow dancers from Purulia. And Moshavi, she has completed her master's from college, and she has been abroad. And here you see Moshavi is in Norway in this photo, where she is training young children there in Chow dance. So, and these are some other photos from other international performances of the Chow troops. So, once there's no limit to the possibilities, that is what really I want to highlight here. But what is needed is the investment in the ICH. Chow, for example, was a night-long dance. So throughout the night, that dance used to happen. Now, no one in a city will stay awake whole night watching the dance. So part of the skill development was to develop their capacity to offer the story in 15 minutes, in 20 minutes, in 30 minutes. So that, that can be presented in a program. So, when all these skill development programs are happening, the possibilities of the opportunities have to be clarified, and then the artists, they innovate on their own. So our experience is cultural heritage, it is a resource for a community's development. And it is skills, and poverty is, what we say, that poverty is a lack of choice, poverty is a lack of employable skills. But in all these historic areas, we have cultural assets, not only in terms of the built heritage of the place, but the intangible. And if we invest in that, we can develop the enterprises leading to economic development. And
just giving you a heads up on time.
And revival of cultural heritage strengthens the identity and creates a pride. And that leads to the community coming forward and do the safeguarding. So in Purulia, all those buildings, which I said, all those red devils, when we started, people used to steal pieces of terracotta from the temple or the terracotta bricks. But now they have come forward, they have constructed, fences, they are managing. So, that ownership that has developed. So this is extremely important. So today, what has happened, Purulia is one of the most popular weekend getaways. So it is, I already spoke about folk holi, even after this pandemic, now that, after lockdown, government is encouraging seeing local tourism and saying vocal for local. All the guest houses in Purulia are full. And government has invested there in building all these accommodations in all these beautiful places, and people are going. So overall, that district also was extremely poor in sanitation, but now all these artists, they have realized the importance. They have toilets at home. So we have achieved in this district, not only they have come out of the poverty, they have income, migration has reduced, BD binding, which was a very common sight before, is not so common anymore. The women are empowered, they are going to school, they are completing education, and lot of SDG goals are being achieved. So I think that is the story of Purulia today, which is a total transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananya. This almost seems like a model case study where we are able to not only learn but test so many frameworks, and new frameworks are being able to be created thanks to proactive government support, as well as the presence of organizations like you, and hence a total sort of socio-economic turnaround is possible, where even ICH, which is lost, is able to kind of get slowly revived and restored. So thank you for that very holistic case. Moving on, I will now introduce the moderator, who is going to continue the rest of the evening as we move on to the panel discussion. So our moderator for today is Dr. Madhura Dutta, who is a development sector professional working in rural India for more than 2 decades with NGOs, with the Unesco, and with CSR programs. She started her career also with banglanatok.com in 2002. In 2012, she joined Unesco as National Program Officer for Culture. Between 2014 and 2018, she headed the All India Artisans and Crafts Workers Welfare Association as its executive director, and is now its governing body member. Last year, she worked as National Program Advisor for Corporate Social Responsibility Programs. This year, she has been working as an independent consultant in the field of culture and development. Madhura has secured a PhD from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, along with MA degrees in sustainable development on a Commonwealth scholarship from Staffordshire University, UK. Welcome, Madhura, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Kamalika. Thank you for the introduction. Good evening to all. So this will be the second session of panel discussions. And can we have the panel discussion slide? Also, I would like to first start with an announcement that we had 3 panel discussions. Professor Aditya Bandopadhyay from Department of Architecture, Town and Regional Planning, IIEST Chitpur, he will not be able to join because of some family emergency. So we will not have him with us today, unfortunately. So in today's panel discussion, we will have two eminent speakers with us, Dr. Monalisa Maharjan and Dr. Sanjib Kumar Borkakot. I would like to start by extending a very warm welcome to you both and would first like to introduce you to our audience. Dr. Monalisa Mahadjan is a researcher at Interdisciplinary History Center, Cultures and Societies, and UNESCO Chair in Intangible Cultural Heritage and Traditional Know-how in Portugal. She has a PhD in Art History and Heritage Studies from University of Évora, Portugal. Her PhD dissertation was on the linking tangible and intangible heritage with the case study of Yenia Punhi Festival of Kathmandu and social associations Gutis related to it. Her current research is focused on authenticity of heritage post-2015 earthquake reconstruction in Kathmandu and changing historic urban landscape in Kathmandu Valley. She is co-coordinator of Association of Critical Heritage Studies, Intangible Heritage Researchers Network, and assistant to editor in Journal of Cultural Heritage, Management and Sustainable Development. Her research interests are on intangible cultural heritage, indigenous knowledge, community participation, and UNESCO conventions. A very warm welcome to you, Monalisa. Now I'll introduce Dr. Sanjib. Dr. Sanjib Kumar Borkakot is a social activist and author of 65 books. He has helped revive the original Ahariya of Ankiya plays created by Srimanta Shankaradeva, the first playwright in modern Indian languages. In 2011, he founded Society for Srimanta Shankaradeva, which promotes Shankari culture and revived manuscript painting. He was associated with the campaign for Majuli as a World Heritage Site. His research work on Satriya dance was instrumental in this dance form getting national recognition. Leading universities like Oxford, Cambridge, Chicago, Michigan, Yale, Stanford, etc. have preserved his books. Thank you, Dr. Sanjib, for joining us as a panelist. So I request the panelists to switch on their videos, please. And, yeah, okay, thank you. So the structure of this discussion will be 2 rounds of questions that I will moderate for the speakers. The first round will be with our panel discussants. In the second round, I will like to bring in all the speakers to reflect upon all that has been shared today. After that, we will take audience questions. For the audience, you may please type your questions in Zoom chat or Facebook and mention who it is for, and we will take it up. So my first question is for Dr. Monalisa. Monalisa, your research work is located in Kathmandu Heritage City and focuses on linking tangible and intangible cultural heritage, as well as regeneration of the city itself. Can you please share from your work the key aspects of urban planning and policy that impact this intangible cultural heritage of the city, and how local residents engage or respond to this living heritage? Over to you, Monalisa.
Okay, thank you, Madhura. Thank you for invitation. Let me share the slide I have. Okay, so I think like most of this, like these things, like the case studies for Kathmandu Valley, and has been, we have a similar case like in India, and like most of the cities that were covered by Shikha Jain. I feel like, you know, we go through the same trajectory of the evolution of the city, and also we have the similar social cultural aspect and also the similar political problem. Maybe the political voice is a bit different, but we are not so different. So in case of like this is some of this work that I have been doing from Kathmandu. Is like when you see city like Kathmandu Valley, it's the cities inside the Kathmandu Valley, they are still like living cities with interconnection between the cultural, social, economical, and everyday activities, like everyday aspect of the life of the people. So like it has been evolved through a long history. Like it has a history of like thousands of years, but in past few decades, the city has gone through the drastic change, like with the urbanization and many migration within the cities for the job and these things. So there has been a kind of sort of disconnection between the heritage, living heritage, and the planners, and also the political system, like who makes the plan for the city, who tries the budget, and who develops like a design for cities. Right now we have in Kathmandu Valley, we have been suffering with the things of satellite cities and smart cities, but we already have like a living heritage city, like which has been planned for like so many years, like centuries, and but still functional. And if you can see like the city space, like either the squares or streets, and even like a small space that you can see, they are comes alive during like a cyclic rituals and things. And you can see the economy things associated with not only with the art and artisans and craft people, but everyday use of the things like markets, vegetable markets, or the market for the special rituals or these things. So and in this time, like when you see like the older cities, like a town, like and villages, and now like a overlapping of this new way of modernizing development. You can see the picture with big car coming to the narrow lane, and this city is not designed for this big cars and this metropolitan city. Like it seems like the disconnected with this urban planning, and they need to know like all the cities, the heritage city, the living heritage cities can't function like the other cities, like which can be like with wide roads and all the networks of the railway or metro or something like that. But there has been like a serious issues with this. But if I get all the question right, so right now there has been it's not all the like negative things that's happening, right? Like these things, but there is some rays of hope in the cities with like a new generation. I think like our generation has much more awareness and in terms of the heritage, like tangible, intangible heritage, with the younger generation than our parents or fathers or grandfathers. So you can see a lot of people coming up for the heritage conservation with like in the individual front, not from the government or like the organizer fund. But there are some organizations, but when you see like small groups, informal groups, and the people like with the communities, they come up together, like either protesting the things like you can see in the left picture, or like these small young kids like continuing the traditions. And there are also lots of the cleaning campaign goes on, this type of thing. I think 2015 earthquake triggered a bit of emotional sentiment of the people when they didn't see what they had been seeing the whole life, and this has brought a good change in itself. And these things has to be implemented in the education system and the planning level. If not, if the government or the education system doesn't include the heritage, especially the ICS in the education system, and to really understand like what the heritage is, because it does all the part of the SDGs, So I think there has to be like this long-term plan, like formal plan from the government to really act on these things, like to take it like for not only for heritage but for other part of the cities and urban space. I hope like I covered your things, questions, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I should stop my screen sharing. Yeah, this.
Sorry. Thank you, Monalisa. I think the key points that you made are very, very pertinent and in context with all that we have been discussing today. So I'll come back to you with more questions, but now we move to Dr. Sanjib. Sanjib, you have been a cultural activist with extensive work and research in the field of intangible cultural heritage in Assam. And one of the very interesting cases is that of the historic holy place of Bardowathan. So my question to you is, can you please share your learning about how the different forms of intangible cultural heritage have sustained through time and contributed to the sustainable development of Bardowathan? Over to you, Sanjib. You are muted.
Thank you, Madhura. Bardowathan is the first satra created by Srimanta Shankardeva. It came into being in the 15th century over the period 1468 to 1509. The satras are residential institution of his order known as Ekasarna Nam Dharma, but they also function as socio-cultural centers. The units set up during his lifetime were known as Than, and those set up later as Satra. Bardowathan is known for so many intangible cultural heritages. You can see the slide on the screen. The prayer performed there is with music. The musical community prayer is a highlight of the Bardowathan. Both men and women participate in it. This has continued over 5.5 centuries. Now these are practiced in 862 satras all over Assam. These satras are residential units of the Vaishnavite Ekasarna Nam Dharma order, which was founded by Srimanta Shankardeva. The next slide. Shikha, the next slide. Yeah. Bardowathan is the birthplace of the classical Satya dance and Ankya play, the first play form in modern Indian languages. Both were created by the polymath Srimanta Shankardeva in 1468. The next slide. Manuscript painting and wooden sculptures were some important crafts practiced in Bardowathan. The Sankari school of painting thus came into being with these. The next. Highlight is that the participation of women is very prominent. Women not only take part in the community prayers, but also have special prayer sessions reserved for them in the Bardowathan. The Kaliva devotees live in the quarters allotted to them in the Than premises. Thus, all the sections in the society contribute to the continuation of the intangible cultural heritages over the centuries. These have also become part of the secular Assamese culture. Srimanta Shankardeva used cultural tools like plays to convey his message, in which he preceded even Bertolt Brecht. As I said, his Ankya plays were the first play in all modern Indian languages. The drum named Khol, the Satyanita, and different classical raga came into being through his Ankya plays, which were first enacted in 1468. The polymath created 25 classical ragas of his own. A special type of painting called Sanskrit painting also came into being along with the drop scene used in the play. This form of painting was later used in the manuscript illustrations. There are also numerous wooden sculptures made by the devotees themselves. All this make Bardwathan a unique place. It was the place of birth of Ankia play, Khol, Satyanita, and Sankara school of painting. Even the architecture of the worshipping hall named Kirtanghar was unique. It is different from all other temples of Hinduism. Community prayers known as Prasanga take place there 14 times every day. The devotees use different classical raga created by Srimanta Shankardeva in devotional songs and even prayers. A unique feature of Bardwathan is that it is open to people of all religions. All this make it a vibrant place. These intangible cultural heritages have been continuously practiced there for half a millennium. These have been sustained by the Kelime devotees living in the premises, as well as the millions of followers spread all over the Brahmaputra Valley, because these were part of the lifestyle created by Srimanta Shankardeva. People living in the vicinity of Bardwathan take part in activities like Prasanga daily. Since mentors have come up all over the valley, they have carried on these legacies. As I said earlier, there are 862 satras in Assam. All of them look up to Bardwathan as the patron place and inspiration. Satyanitra is included in the curriculum of 3 universities in Assam. It is also taught in a university in France. Ankia play is included in the curriculum of National School of Drama. And some artists have taken the songs and the dances from out of the satras. Thus, it is spread outside. So while these were earlier performed as prayers, later they came to be recognized as performing art forms. Now these are part of the secular Assamese culture. Young people are learning the ICH like Satyanita after its recognition as classical dance form by Sangeet Natak Academy. The Sangeet Natak Academy has helped in the revival of the original aharya used in the Ankia plays. So for your first part of question, I think this will do.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjib. I think this is a beautiful example of a syncretic space with intermingling of rituals, cultural heritage, community beliefs, and communities' participation for such a long time. So thank you very much for sharing such an interesting case. So coming to the second round, we have heard about 2 cases, the key viewpoints and observations, one from Assam in India and the other from Kathmandu in Nepal. And we are also sort of understanding through all the presentations that intangible cultural heritage and culture is a very, very cross-cutting vertical along the entire heritage and community development processes that we look at. So with that, I'm going to first address a question to Dr. Shikha Jain to bring in a more global perspective. Shikha, are you there? Shikha, are you there?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi. So my question to you is, regarding the heritage divide between tangible and intangible cultural heritage and imbalances in programs and policies seen at a global level, and also you mentioned through your work how you've been able to bring it together, but still that divide exists. So what would be your recommendations going forward for a more holistic approach and actions?
I think I covered a bit of that towards the end in my presentation. This is something, the divide is something that we are we have to accept it, whether it's UNESCO, which has ICH and World Heritage as two separate components. Though, of course, as an organization, it says culture and development, and one needs to work across conventions. And that's the attempt that we made. Like for Jaipur, it is two different conventions, but trying the aim and is similar to address the living heritage, both tangible and intangible together. And we are trying to achieve it through both, which are different conventions. In a similar manner, you saw, like, even if it is Government of India programs which do not really allow, you have the Culture Ministry, which is looking at the intangible, and the tangible is either Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which is within the cities, or it could be monument centric like ASI. Yet we have to bring it together by, for that we need to understand what is the potential of each program or scheme that the government has. And they are always open. Like if we go with the proposals, saying how it can be combined or how we can bring it together, it's good even for them to see convergence of these schemes. And that's what was attempted in here. They had like a central committee where they had representatives from tourism, culture, and all other departments, because for the city, they wanted to bring a more holistic approach. So I think that's one key, that you need to get all, though the departments would exist or the divisions would exist, but when you're taking a decision on or proposing some kind of intervention or development, then all of those should come together, through a committee or through a, implementing agency, so that it's a more holistic approach.
Right. So true. I mean, this is one of the major challenges also, we think, and at the same time, I think effective communication, advocacy, and actually what you said very rightly, placing the right programs, rightly designed programs to these decision makers is important. I just want to ask you one more question. When you were mentioning your recommendations, I know we had to cut it short a little bit because of lack of time. So in recommendation 3, you said something about redefining ICH. So can you just expand on that a little?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we usually don't question, as ICH, we are mapping processes and rituals and associations, and we just think that it is all positive that needs to be documented. What I was trying to say is that there are a lot of traditions that we follow just for the sake of traditions, but they had certain meaning, which was embedded in how we understood nature. It could be related to the agricultural, the seasons and agriculture and other aspects, or even, simple thing like, when you have the deity, for Chhat Puja and all, when we immerse in the water, and the kind of material that was used earlier, and the plastic and other things that go today. So there is a big difference, and at times I feel we are following rituals for the sake of following rituals without understanding how they, what the origin was, what the meaning was. So I think that's what we need to inspect, the origin and meaning. And if it requires a change to the contemporary scenario, then we should, understand that and explain that to the community, so they also realize that it's, there is a purpose and meaning to the rituals. It's not just blindly following a ritual just for the sake, because it's been followed for generations.
Yeah. Thank you, Shikha, for explaining this so nicely. My next question will be to Monalisa. And I'm choosing to ask you after Shikha also, because when Shikha was presenting and when you were presenting, we could really see the connect in the approach or in the viewpoints or the critical points that you were making. So Monalisa, what I want to ask you is, what would you say are the 3 key takeaways for stakeholders of urban governance that would best balance urban conservation, city infrastructure, and vibrancy of ICH in a sustainable manner? You have given us a presentation specific to Kathmandu, but we wanted to understand if there are 3 takeaways that you want to share. What would be those for stakeholders of urban governance?
First, I think like the takeaway message will be like the governments should the stakeholders should understand what's the local knowledge is, like a traditional knowledge are, like not to have this the Shikha say, like to follow the sake of the rituals, just to continue, right? Like to understand the meaning behind it. And also many people tend to forget like the use of place, and also like it tend to divide, like, you know, like as in India too, like there's tangible and intangible, tangible by certain things, and, you know, in the government level. But we tend to forget that for the local communities, for the practitioner, there is no differences between the tangible and intangible. You know, in the tangible places, their festival, their rituals, you know, their practices, they all take place. So I think we should understand this, like what the local community mean, like the real understanding in this, like grassroots level, like what the actual people, like who are the bearer of these things and who are the practitioners. So we should try to understand this thing. I think the main thing will be that, like also like yeah, I think that will sum up the things. I think if you really try to check the how the local communities and indigenous people sees the things in their perspective, so we could solve a lot of problems, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Monalisa, for making a strong point about what can address the problem. My next question will be to Ananya. Ananya, you there? So we saw the whole transformation that happened in Purulia, and we also understood that, and we understand that it is a very, very long-term process, and engaging with the whole intervention with the communities is a very long process. So I wanted to ask you, how can the experience of Purulia's transformation be disseminated in a way so that such learning can be integrated into more broad-based programs and policies? How do we make the learning more broad-based? Because as Kamalika also said, that it is a beautiful intermingling of smaller projects, because everything is under a particular department or under a particular specialization, but Art brings the whole thing together. So how do you see this learning getting integrated into more broad-based programs and policies? And if you have undertaken any such effort, if you can share that.
You know, in Purulia, we have worked primarily with the Khadi and MSME department, the micro and small and medium enterprises, because our focus has been on cultural industries. And the tourism story I was telling you, that has been an outcome. But if you look at our tourism policy, all across our country, we are doing cultural tourism policy, but we are rarely talking about investing in the skill of the community. Because often it becomes like, you know, organizing a performance or maybe a walk to see, but even the community needs to be trained in storytelling, in, you know, developing productions which can be offered, and experiences, tourism products basically. So what we are now trying to do is, you know, develop policy briefs which can be shared with the stakeholders. Another, I shared the example of the GI and the UNESCO inscription. So we have our Ministry of Commerce with the IP policy, IPR policy, but though craft is, you know, the second important livelihood for rural India, that policy does not talk about all this. So these are the places where I think we need to share policy brief. We have also organized recently consultations with stakeholders where we have shared a toolkit, you know, how to commercialize ICH and the toolkit for that, and how to ensure it remains heritage sensitive and avoid all the pitfalls of over commercialization. So I think these are part of the processes that you need to engage the stakeholders. The moment, we are talking of ICH and it is getting connected to films, it is getting connected to design and other sectors. For example, in Purulia, the Chow Dance has been used in movies as famous as Barfi. But nowhere it is acknowledged as a Chow Dance in the movie. They have been, of course, paid. But, that attribution, that acknowledgement is missing. So, what the artists have done now, they've come up with a code of conduct with which they are now reaching out to the stakeholders and saying that do recognize us, do attribute us, do involve us. I think these are, again, long steps, but through, these stakeholder consultations and availability of guidelines, documents, toolkits, briefs, I think we can all take this forward. Like when I was listening to Shikha, I was thinking the same that, these are available for people to refer to, because, we are all talking about converted group, but, others also need to be roped in. So I think that's
yeah. Thank you, Ananya. I'll go to Shimona now. Shimona, you're there?
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. So the Chitpur initiative that you talked about, extremely interesting in terms of how art can actually contribute to refreshing the community memories in the local places and actually do more than that. So and what you rightly also pointed out is that it needs to be more sustainable, but then necessarily it does not overlap with the artist's work, and there are other stakeholders who need to come in. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think the Chitpur initiative can sustain in the long run and attain economic viability for the local communities? Like, I mean, even if it's rough, do you have any exit strategy in mind? Do you have any idea about how it can become sustainable in the long run?
So one of the thoughts that we had was to, like I said, to keep building this ecosystem, because the artists have one role, and and that role is really to constantly be generative and constantly raise questions, constantly instigate people, instigate imagination. So it's a very different role from saying that, okay, now from an artist, I want you to create a product, and now after you finish your project, there'll be a product, and then that'll be go to the market, because that completely alters the purpose of engaging the arts with ICH. And that purpose is to keep, keep it fresh and keep questioning it and keep sort of reinvigorating it. And that I feel like is a separate category of things. But what then we try to do is to continue with this bottom-up approach and create the Chitpur Craft Collective. And that's where we invited designers, we invited people in the city who are working with crafts, we invited stores and retail outlets, art schools, and learning centers to come and think about projects that they can do, in tourism companies, walks companies, to come and think about projects that they can do with the crafts people in the Crafts Collective. So that has been an ongoing initiative. I think we are, trying to structure it and build it there. It was paused because of the pandemic, I think, but hopefully next year we can pick that up. So we want to continue with this way in which is very collaborative, where it's very bottom up, but yeah, bring in other stakeholders into the ecosystem to see how they can add or build on the work that has been catalyzed on the ground by the artists.
Right. Thanks, Shimona. You basically echoed what you have also tried to point out in your presentation. Thank you. So going over to Dr. Sanjib. Throughout our discussions, we have seen that ICH plays such an important role in sustainable regeneration and conservation of historic areas. And also, from your presentation, I understand that because it has been there for such a long time, from the time of Shankaradeva, I'm sure the traditional contexts of the ICH that you have talked about have changed over time. So I wanted to understand, does that pose a threat to the ICH in any way? And how do you see them coexisting together through time? First of all, has the context changed? And if so, then do you think that is a threat to this ICH?
Before giving reply to this question, I would like to say a few words in context of your question to Monalisa. You asked her the takeaway, and I was thinking, and I realized that the Angya play, the hymns and songs of Shankardeva have impressed people for 5 centuries, whereas some song composed last year do not attract people this year. When I analyzed it, I found that there's a very important message in those Angya plays or in those songs or hymns. And that message is that ethics is very important. If we remove the names of God, like Rama, Krishna, Hari, then we find that he talks about ethics, that don't harm people. You have to love everyone. So that appeal for humanity, that appeal for love for all is there in his plays, in his songs. So that has kept people interested over the centuries. And regarding the challenge which you are now asking me, it has come from the modernization. The young people, young singers, the professional singers, they have changed the songs a bit. And even some reputed singers have done that. So they should not do that with classical things. Classical song or classical play or classical dance is something which should be preserved. So all the artists should honor that. And in that, the organizations like Sangeet Natak Academy also has a role to play. And secondly, there's a very crucial problem faced by all the satras, including Bardwathan, that is encroachment. And people become very violent when the encroachers are evicted. And in the process, some people have died also. In one instance, one Satratika was killed by the encroachers. So life is very risky in some areas. So the government should come with due protection to these places.
So, but what about the fact that these ICH had certain context earlier, but right now those contexts may or may not exist? My question is, how do you see the continuity of this ICH? Beautifully, you said the message of humanity, which I think is the core, which is why it is going on for decades. But then, just to sort of reiterate the question, has that change in context of how the ICH were practiced have impacted their continuity in any way or their forms in any way?
No, the context has not changed. I do not find any change in the context. The content and the context have remained the same over the centuries. And because of that, it have survived. Even now, when an Angya play is enacted, people go there in hundreds. People come in hordes. So the popularity is there because of the context.
Right, right. That's I think is a very, very interesting point, because we understand working with intangible cultural heritage that content and context plays an extremely important role, which is also aligning to understanding the community, understanding the culture, what Shikha also just mentioned about history, about how it has evolved and things like that. So thank you, Dr. Sanjib. So I have a few questions from the audience that I will just like to take up. So there is one question for Shimona. Shimona, you're there?
Yeah.
So this is a question from Rula Abu Khatir. And the question is, how can we find more details or published materials on your project? Are there such
shared a link
documentation?
to, so no, we don't have like a publication as such, but a lot of the information is on the website. So I shared the link, www.hamdasti.com. I put it in the chat, and also from there you can go to the Craft Collective website as well. But yeah, we still have to, I think the important work of documentation is still left to be done.
Yes, I was just about to ask, because I mean, this question triggers the thought that, I mean, you have done so much of work, and the things that you shared was so interesting and had a different perspective in terms of how an artist is looking at it. And they are like all separate art projects brought together. So what about the documentation of that, which can really...
Absolutely, it really needs to be done. It definitely needs to be done. I think we work with very strained resources, so when we get a moment to do that, we will certainly do that. But in the meanwhile, Rishika, who's in this audience, Mukhopadhyay, she's doing a really interesting, her research project at the University of Exeter is on the crafts of Chitpur, and she has also written very interestingly and insightfully about some of the work in her upcoming research, so I thank her for that as well. So.
Yeah, those kinds of knowledge integrating together makes a difference.
Yeah, and brings a new perspective to our own work as well. Yeah, so yeah.
So there's a question for Shikha by Komalika. So I'll just read that out. We have seen that when city municipal corporations designate and list heritage precincts and map neighborhoods, the criteria and significance is largely drawn from its architectural and built heritage attributes, and ICH rarely is mapped or considered. How can this much needed change be brought around at the heritage committee levels?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question, Kamalika, because that is the standard that a lot of Indian cities were using. They just did grade 1, 2, 2A, 3, and it was largely architectural, historic significance. And but I mean, that's the exercise we are now taking up for Jaipur, and that is why I said that the very fact that it is inscribed on criteria 6. So, for making the detailed special area heritage plan now, the development plan for the area, we have to take that as a value. It is, it is part of the outstanding universal value attributes. And that's why currently in the heritage cell, we have 2 conservation architects and other people who are actually going through the exercise where they have a complete table for the ICH value also. So and you have the associative value. It is social, religious, it is there even in Kanchenjunga National Park that I mentioned, the associative value was taken as an important value. So it is for us to tell the municipal corporation and get those documents changed to integrate that value, besides the architectural, historic and all. And one needs to realize that the values also get customized to the particular site or the city. So for each city, we really need to look for the local values that are particularly associated with it and not generalize it. It has to be specific, and that is what one figures out. I mean, it's an exercise that we are carrying out in some cities, but probably Jaipur would be the first case where it will actually get reflected in the municipal corporation documents. And I'm happy to share it if any other municipal corporation wants to take that on board. But that's something we need to, feed into all these corporations and the documents that exist today.
Right. Kamalika, that answers your question. Or you have some follow-up?
Yes, no, because I thought that that is almost something that always gets missed out. We try to get other organizations or sort of educational institutes or other sort of partnerships that tend to really study, document thoroughly, research, but that synergy and that marrying between when we finally go to notify neighborhoods, because we might end up not designating a rich neighborhood because its architectural qualities might be lost, but it has some very rich intangible qualities, but we tend to overlook it because it doesn't fit certain prerequisites. So that was my question. Since we have maybe 5 minutes, I was just wondering whether any of y'all would like to kind of react to each other's presentations or thoughts that have been shared, unless if we've exhausted audience questions. Do we have more audience questions?
We have 2 more audience questions.
Okay, so let's take that first, and then maybe it will be good if some...
Yeah. Right. So this is a question from Shukrit for all the panelists and the speakers. So he's writing, when we talk about ICH, it has a direct link with its current surroundings, which has been changing and adapting since time. Today, when we are in an online era where the so-called physical aspect doesn't play the most important role, how, as heritage enthusiasts, do we encourage the custodians of the ICH to not get drawn towards modern establishments, which is often logistically suitable in current times? Or do we need to at all? It's a very long question, but he has typed it on the chat in case you want to review the question.
I think this...
want to ask yourself? Yeah, Dr. Sanjib, please go. Please go.
Online facilities have given a fresh lease of life to the ICH, because people are getting exposed now. A lot of ICH have got more exposure than before.
Yeah, true. Very true. Anyone else want to address this question?
I just wanted to cross-check with Sukrit. When he's saying modern facilities, or is he talking about the facilities or the tool? Because I think digital or using the, digital technology works very well for ICH. It is a tool. And which, if the crafts people, like what Ananya was saying, the skill investments, so if that is done for them, it will really upgrade their skills to also use it as a tool, but not it is not going to detract from the significance of the crafts itself. In fact, enhance it. Was that what you were questioning?
Absolutely. We are definitely looking at this online era as an opportunity, definitely. But what I mean to say is that many craftsmen, for example, when we look at the historic towns and when they sit in their own neighborhoods and do their work from their shops, which also adds to the character of a precinct, if I may say. For example, Chitpur, like Shumardi mentioned, and how these craftsmen have been sitting, that provides much to the character of that entire neighborhood. Now, when we are looking at an online era, people are selling and creating their stuff, like mainly they're selling it through their computers. They don't really need an infrastructure, for example. And to many of those people who have been paying rent, they often think that, it's just better to do my product from home and, not go out there on the street where I have been sitting looking out for customers, because my customers are available on my computer. So I'm just, will we now face a slight, decline towards this aspect which the ICH connects to, especially in these precincts? If I made my question clear.
Okay, can I answer?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's a very good question, Sukrit, because that's something that is in all our minds, you know, especially when we have seen in the COVID situation how the city just was impacted and the craftspeople. And that's something, I mean, I personally thought it would be really good because now we have this LIDAR technology and laser. In Jaipur itself, the government was, looking at drone imagery, and during COVID, they did a lot of mapping. Even the World Heritage City Lab in UNESCO, asked for an image showing how they did the drone coverage. But I was just thinking that rather than, because when I'm looking at something online, I don't feel very good buying things online, even if it is for the crafts. I like to see the craftsperson right there and how it is being made. And there are a lot of people who want the real experience, and nothing can replace that. But what would be really good is if we can have that experience virtually. So you're not just seeing some names or some photographs, but you actually have an immersive experience into the city. Like I can walk into the streets in the bazaars and, go to a shop and buy it. And that can be a completely virtual immersive experience with the technology we have. It will give the audience that feeling that he's actually walking into the city without, being in the real one. But we are getting that with virtual reality and augmented, and a complete city can be created like that, where it can directly help the shops and the craftspeople there. I mean, that's something that I feel is one possible solution, maybe. Even in these situations when there's a lockdown, they would still have that access. And there are a lot of tourism programs I see, with people are going on online tours these days. They are paying and going online. So it could be a city experience like that.
Thank you, Shikha, for these interesting examples of use of technology. I would just like to address one more question, which is a very interesting one. This is a question from Astha Gaur, a student of University of Hong Kong. She's asking to all the panelists and the speakers, don't you think that the potential of culinary heritage has still not been realized in India? How do you think food like art can be used as a tool to empower communities? I mean, this is not really a specific component of any of the case studies, but I thought it is an interesting question, and I'm sure you come across these things when you work. So yeah, all of you can actually.
I just want to say that I think it's being recognized. Last year, we had Hyderabad as a UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy. And that is a creative city. I mean, we have Lucknow, and that time we had three cities competing: Lucknow, Amritsar, and Hyderabad, who sent in the application. Only Hyderabad got through. So I think now that potential cities are realizing, and it should come.
Thank you, Shikha, for again very pertinent examples. Great to know. So I think I'll close the Q&A session here, and I'll hand it over to Kamalika.
Thank you, Madhura, and thank you all our speakers and discussants for this very lively discussion. We've also had some very interesting questions. So thank you for facilitating that, Madhura. Before I move on to the sort of concluding rituals of this seminar, may I request all our speakers and audience to please put on your videos for a minute so that we can take a group photo with everyone. Sujata, would you take the screenshot, please?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. As we come to the end of today's webinar on intangible cultural heritage in historic areas and precincts, I would like to now talk about the final webinar series, which is coming up on the 5th of December. So Jata, if you could just share the screen. The final thematic webinar on 5th of December.
There's a wrong screen.
The final thematic webinar on the 5th of December is on resilience to disaster, pandemic, and climate change in historic precincts and areas. That would bring an end to this 5-month endeavor, a 4-month endeavor that we have been trying to do at the East Zone and the NSC HTV. So I would like y'all and invite y'all to join us for this culmination webinar. And we intend to sort of collate all the learnings and knowledge sharing from all these webinars eventually into a formal publication. I would also like to inform you that the final, the next cycle of memberships for ICOMOS India is now open, and we are calling out to conservation professionals, heritage enthusiasts, institutions and organizations, patrons and champions who are dedicated to safeguarding the preservation of our heritage. Our membership comprises historians, architects, archaeologists, conservators, planners, educators, curators, interpretation specialists, anthropologists, and engineers. So as you can see, it's a very rich ecosystem, very interdisciplinary, which sort of enriches our conversations and knowledge sharing. And finally, as a vote of thanks, I would like to once again thank all our speakers and discussants. I would also like to thank the core coordination team of Shanghamitra Di and Ananya Di, Arjun for the collateral, Sujata for handling the Zoom, Anshika for managing the Zoom, Aditi as the rapporteur, and Sukrit and Nandini for publicity and promotions, and the entire EPWG team of volunteers for so robustly supporting this endeavor. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you.